very first time we are seeing and hearing from Elton Simpson himself, known as Ibrahim to his fellow Muslims, speaking in a 2012 video to raise funds for his new mosque, reflecting on his faith.
It provides for you a form of weaponry to go out into the real world and use that weaponry to shield you against the tricks of the shaitan.
Shaitan or Satan. CNN is also learning the FBI is calling in members of the mosque for what's described as friendly interviews, trying to find out why this seemingly soft-spoken man would take this violent turn. Vocab Malone believes he knows. He also worked with Simpson for 3 years at a delivery company. Malone recalls arguing theology with Simpson for hours upon hours.
I was surprised, but not shocked. I wouldn't put it past him because I understood the sincerity of his beliefs. And he had expressed to me admiration, specifically for Osama bin Laden. He used the word hero.
Why do you think he took that step?
My guess is he felt as if no one was doing anything to defend the Prophet's honor. Something must be done. He was the one to do it.
As a result of you knowing him and having had a lot of actually theological conversations with him, you were on CNN and then also got picked up by the AP and just sort of the snowballed from there. A lot of different places wanted to talk to you.
If you count radio interviews, like podcasts, broadcasts, all that, it was like 7 in 2 days. I realized that the media has words they've created to try to understand Islamic theology that no Muslim actually uses. And so I kept on trying to use the right word, and I realized how problematic it was, this shorthand of radicalized and radicalization and extreme and hardcore and terrorist even. They have their own way they understand it, and it's not really accurate to the picture that's going on, in my opinion, as far as how the Muslims themselves who engage in this kind of activity understand it. So I think the conversation is really abridged, and I don't think it's helpful. That's one thing I learned. Mm-hmm. Right and left, in my opinion, they generally speaking have a very secularist understanding of what religion is, the way it functions in a person's life, and even how to describe things. So Elton wouldn't call himself any of the terms they called himself. He would call himself a Salafi Muslim or Muslim. I don't understand why we can't just use that term and make that term the real term we use to describe him instead of extremist or radicalized or hardcore.
Well, what does Salafi mean?
It has to do with a certain understanding of Islam. I forget what that exact word Salafi itself means. I think it has to do with the way things were. Like Salafi has to do with the golden age when they view Islam as being the best right after Muhammad and right in his day as well, and the companions who were right after him. It has to do with going back to that. So it has to do with going essentially back to what they view as the sources. That's what a Salafi Muslim believes you should practice and do. Like, we're going to have this conversation, and in the news, they just roll so casually, and I don't really think they're going to be able to get to the bottom of it until they seek a deeper understanding, honestly. One thing that I found disheartening when this story would get reposted, different variations of either my post or an interview I did or the CNN stuff, the comment section is mainly what bothered me. Because I made my point in the article that he was not crazy, he was not insane, he wasn't rude or mean on a normal level. He did this because of a greater obligation he felt he had, and he thought he was doing the morally right thing, and people just couldn't understand that. They would, say, these guys were monsters, and they would make fun of them dying, or they would say things like, oh, well, they weren't successful, they should have chose a different place other than Texas, and these types of failures, but it shows they're not understanding. Here's what I mean. Why did ISIS want to claim credit for this attack that happened in Garland, Texas? If they viewed it as a failure, why? Because what happened is Elton and Nadir drove up to the place, opened fire, and were immediately killed. They didn't kill anybody. Why would ISIS say we did that when it's probably sure they actually didn't do anything other than kind of like egg him on through Twitter? Because they view it as a success.
Yeah.
That's what you have to understand this theology. They think it's success because it's still defending the Prophet's honor in their mind. It's still showing people that they cannot mock Muhammad without impunity. It's still showing America that we have these types of folks in your midst. In fact, shortly after this, ISIS came out with a statement saying, we've got people in this many cities ready to go. So another thing, to understand Elton and his friend, why did they drive to Texas? He didn't shoot people in Phoenix. They had to drive. It's far. He didn't just randomly open fire on people. He viewed them specifically as guilty, worthy of death. So it wasn't random. It was targeted for a specific purpose and reason. To me, that should help show people what you might want to call the rationality of the position. If you start with certain flawed axioms and you logically work out from them, you can end up at positions that look radical or extreme or rational, but they're actually connected to what you believe prior. Elton is a perfect example of that. He wasn't mean. He was a serious student of Islam. He wasn't angry when I knew him. He was just a serious student of Islam. Did he get snapped and change into a radical Muslim? They kept on asking me, when did Elton snap? I said he didn't snap. He just went from a serious student of Islam to a more serious student of Islam. That's the only change I saw in him.
Wow.
Other people would push back on that end and say, wait a minute, it sounds like you're saying that if all Muslims really do what the Quran says and follows the Hadith, they'll do things like Elton. I'm like, well, I sort of am saying something like that, but the Quran is contradictory. So sometimes it says make friends, other times it says don't. The problem is who's going to win the battle in the textual data. It's going to be the Muslims with the violent sword verses on their side because they have more to go on, basically, and their verses are later, and they have more examples from Muhammad's life in the Hadith than the people on the other side. They have a much smaller handful of verses to really pick and choose from. That's my thought.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that, but one thing I do want to touch on is sort of how you began your interaction with him.
Well, first it was at work.
Yeah.
I didn't meet him witnessing first. So we worked together. One day I was walking out. If I see a little guy reading a book that says the Gospel of Barnabas, I knew that was a forged polemical document written against Christians that Muslims love to read. And I said, are you a Muslim? Just right away. And he said, yes. I said, well, I'm a Christian. Here's what I believe about Jesus. What do you believe? And we just started talking. The first time we met, we talked 2.5, almost 3 hours. And all of our conversations after that were strictly on theology. Like, we didn't talk about really hobbies, so we really got into each other's head space, if you will. And in our first conversation, he referred to Osama bin Laden as a hero. He said if he lived in a place that was his pick, I would not be able to do the radio show I do because it was giving poison over the airwaves, and no person in their right mind would allow poison to go distributed that way. He said that... one other thing that's interesting about it, he gave me my first Quran. So the very first copy of the Quran I got was from him. He said, here, brother, I want you to read this, and you'll see the truth. And he also gave me my first Hadith collection, a collection of 40. So the first Quran I got, the first Hadith collection I got were from him. I gave him some material from answeringislam.org. He read it, marked up the paper, gave it back to me. I remember he said, this is like something a child would write or something. That was his critique, but he had little notes on there. Smart guy, bright guy, intellectual guy, knew more about Christianity than a lot of Christians. He knew about the textual variants in 1 John 5:7. Wow. When he first told me that, I was like, dude, I wish Christians knew about what you're saying. So I enjoyed talking to him. He always smiled. He was always warm. I just know he had a greater allegiance. That's what's going on. He had a greater allegiance than to America or to you or to his neighbor or to strangers. His greater allegiance is to a false prophet named Muhammad and a false god named Allah.
So you met him at work, but then you also then began to interact with him when you were outside the mosque, right?
Mm-hmm. I have a talk.
And you don't go by yourself, too. I mean, it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, we have teams. One time I went by myself, but I would never do that again. But we have teams of people who go. And the mosque that I went to Christians. Regularly, well, some of the Christians would go with their Arabic Christians. But the funny thing is, the Muslims, generally speaking, have more disdain for the Arabic-speaking Christians than they do for the white guys. It's interesting. And for the Hispanic dudes, they generally dislike them more. Okay. Wow. Their view is almost like, you know already. How dare you? But it's interesting to hear them converse in Arabic, nonetheless. But so
that sort of makes sense to me. That have more disdain because they feel that they knew more and shouldn't have been swayed.
Yeah, so
right?
It's still a helpful tool because you need Arabic speakers and some people with knowledge about the culture. It helps, but it's actually, I think, would be less. It's better to have a diverse team. I'll just say that. So we go out there when we witness. We'd stand on the public sidewalks. We don't have signs. We don't have crazy shirts, and we just ask them, "Would you like a copy of the Gospel of John?" Or I'll just say, "Holy Injil for you," because that's what they call it. And if they say no, I say, "God bless you." If they say something else, I interact with them. I don't follow them. We stay on the sidewalk, and that's really it. It's a way to get them to read the Bible, which none of them have done hardly. Seriously, I'm not joking. Very few of them have done. Like one guy, I still remember read the Bible. Haven't even finished the Quran. So they're not jumping at the bit to read John, but they need to. And some of them do take it and read it. Some of them talk, and it's a great way to talk. Now, here's the parallel. I have a talk I give, and I go through the book of Acts, and I show all the places where the early church went into the synagogues or the public markets and openly engaged ideas and proclaimed Jesus as Messiah in known hostile contexts where other business was happening and disrupted what was happening in essence by what they did, knowing that that would be the result. Sometimes they received well, occasionally, other times they weren't. It's not identical, but it is what I would call a parallel track to stand outside of a mosque and ask someone if they would like the Bible. Now, someone says, well, why? Well, listen, every person in there is not a Christian. It's targeted. At the mall, there's some Christians at the mall, right? I mean, I imagine. Every person coming out of there would self-identify as a Muslim. It's a great missionary opportunity. Don't we go to Muslim countries? The gospel is greatly restricted. Here they are coming to us from all over North Africa, Algeria, Ghana. Here they are coming from all these places in the Middle East. Here they are. They're converted because they grew up with a weak Christianity, whatever the case is. They're not touched by Christians by and large. It's a totally untouched mission field. Very few of them have a Christian friend. Some of them do, but a lot of the guys I talk today literally have no Christian friends. And very few of them have ever heard a Christian present what I'm presenting to them. So to me, it's strategic, it's wise, and who could ever say preaching the gospel, especially if all you're doing is handing someone a gospel to John, could ever be wrong in any situation? Now, do I want to leave it there? No. The idea is we move into a deeper place with them. Get their phone number, go meet them somewhere, talk to them, and I've been able to do that 2 or 3 times, and that's always a much greater blessing. But if a Muslim takes home a copy of Gospel of John and reads it and gets a true picture of Jesus, that's part of a victory, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And I want them to at least have an opportunity to know a Christian and see we're not out there to hate, we're not out there to mock, we're out there to tell them the truth about the gospel because they're lost and dying and going to hell. And before they get there, they may do violent acts against you. So it's not just preventative maintenance, but sometimes when people are like, what are you going to do? Are you just going to shoot them? Are you going to, you see these letters of some of the mosques are getting that Elton went to. Mm-hmm. We're going to burn down a mosque for every person that dies at the hands of ISIS or something. They're not going to do that, first of all. And second of all, that's not the right way to respond. Yeah. It's not a battle of guns and bombs and bullets. It's a battle of competing gospels and what's the truth about God.
Yeah, what's interesting in what and I observed one of your interviews, it feels as if I came away with 2 things. I think you want to have people have more sympathy and empathy,
yes,
for the Muslims, including so-called radical Muslims,
but then not to be scared, to go deal with it.
Yeah. So
just so people know, not to make them scared, like, look how nasty it really is. It's to go then deal with it. So you actually know what you're interacting with. Now, I said I love Elton, great guy. Let me qualify. Look, he had murder in his heart. His intent was to murder. Biblically speaking, I believe we all have murder in our heart. I think the New Testament backs that up. I am saying Islam is especially pernicious because I believe it is a systematized way that encourages the murder that is within all men and women's hearts. So it draws out, like a magnet, what is already naturally there. I don't think Elton would have done what he did had he not been a serious student of Islam.
I'm going to tell you, like, make a call an election, sure, like keeping God's commandments.
So do you keep them perfectly?
Mm-hmm.
Do you keep them? No one does. That's why we need Jesus. So how can you make your calling election, sir, if you don't keep it perfectly?
By keeping it.
You covet, don't